Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Tracy Groves. I am a consultant on market and economic change. I'm very interested in technology-driven economic change and certainly how that relates to sustainability and climate change solutions. I'm thrilled to be here today with my friend Gil Friend. Most of us know him as a luminary thought leader in the realm of sustainability. And he's wearing a new hat, some of you may know, as Chief Sustainability Officer of Palo Alto. So Gil, thanks so much for being here.
Really a pleasure.
Well, I have a ton of questions for you. This sounds like an exciting role. You've moved from an advisor, a consultant in sustainability, award-winning leader, I've heard, right? You're part of the Hall of Fame of Sustainability.
Sustainability Hall of Fame from the inaugural class of that, yeah.
Okay, that's very impressive.
Yeah.
And now you are a practitioner. You are an implementer. You want to tell us something about that?
Well, it was a very conscious choice I made. About 3 or 4 years ago, I started thinking about this. I spent
Get closer a little bit.
really.
I think you're going to have to pass the mic.
Let's try it one more time this way. How about that? Will that
Much
work?
better.
Okay. Let us know if it doesn't work. After 30 years earning my living selling advice, which is a strange task. Some of you here are consultants. You know what that's like. You develop brilliant programs and you provide them to your clients, and maybe they implement and maybe they don't. And your ability to brag on the success depends on what other people have done or not done. I thought it'd be interesting to go inside somewhere. And as I put it, to get my hands on the wheel and my ass on the line. For producing results. I thought I would do that as a corporate chief sustainability officer. Actually talked with a number of large companies about that. And then one day in late 2013, a headhunter for the city of Palo Alto knocked on the door and said, would you be interested in this? My first response was, we're bringing forward a climate plan on the 18th. That will propose that Palo Alto reduce its greenhouse gas emissions 80%, the same goal as the state of California, but to do it by 2030, not by 2050, which is the California goal. So it's very exciting. It's ambitious. It's challenging. It's it's not just all the things you'd expect in organizational transformation and consulting and engineering, but you've got this interesting wrapper of several layers of democracy.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. And that's never a linear experience.
It's far from it.
But,
And
yeah.
one of our speakers this morning, I think it was Perron, quoted Winston Churchill. And I remember sitting at a city council meeting 2 years ago with Churchill resonating in my head. Another famous quote of his, he said, democracy is without any question the worst political system ever devised by humans, except for everything else.
Right. Yes,
And the truth of that just resonates for me every week.
We heard from several speakers too that, again, and we've been hearing this for years now, that cities, that's really where it's at. People get frustrated at the national level and topic of climate change. And so it's exciting to see you in this, in the city, in the trenches, and in a city that really wants to be on the front edge of this.
And working with other cities collaboratively
Fantastic.
who are doing the same. We're a member of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is 150 or so North American CSOs. We're in touch with CSOs in Scandinavia and Asia and other parts of the world. What we're seeing around the world is that cities are at the forefront of this issue. And I would tend to think that, well, Europe is far ahead of the United States. The European Union has much more established sustainability strategies. And European city people will say, no, that's just what it looks like from the outside. Even inside here, the leadership is coming from the cities.
Interesting. So in your role, what's top of mind for you when you get into the office? When you're trying to get to the office, what's the biggest thing on your plate right now?
Well, you tipped the secret. Trying to get to the office is part of the challenge. It's as with any sustainability work, it's a multifaceted job, and part of the challenge is maintaining the full range of relevant issues and keeping them connected in a coherent way. In fact, the ask of me when they brought me in, they said, look, we've been doing sustainability stuff for decades. We've got hundreds of initiatives underway, but what we don't have is a coordinated, coherent, strategic focus to it all. So that's what we're trying to build. But it's challenging to do that in an operating environment where you've got people whose primary responsibility is delivering day-to-day services. Utility has to deliver electricity today and tomorrow and the next day that is reliable and economical and safe. And that's a pretty big job right there. And so and they do their 5-year plans, but thinking about what the world might be in 20 or 30 years, it's just hard to find the bandwidth to talk about it. So I'm the guy who's supposed to focus on that, and working with other people who don't have the time to focus on that, and finding a way that we can actually engage that conversation in a way that's productive and grounded, and connects to those day-to-day work plans and starts to build the platforms for the next leap.
Yeah, that sounds like a really important role. I know with my experience with strategic foresight, it really represents a break in your day-to-day thinking, and sometimes people's first reaction is, what? No, that has nothing to do with what I'm doing right now. So how do you get
Sometimes
your
it's
colleagues
that.
to
Sometimes
kind of
people
move
say, I'm interested in that, but I don't have time to deal with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say, I don't understand what you're talking about. So in my first month there, I was talking with some of my counterparts on the executive team of the city about net zero energy buildings. It's a concept that's familiar here, but this person's reaction was, well, that's impossible.
Right, yeah.
She didn't know. She had never encountered the concept. She hadn't seen any examples of it. She thought back to what she learned about thermodynamics in high school and thought, well, you couldn't possibly do that. And I said, and this is kind of a basic MO for me, I said, well, I actually have a list of 41 net zero buildings within 50 miles of here. And she said, oh, this is a smart person. Figured out immediately, oh, it's not impossible, right? Ken Boulding used to say that existence is proof of the possible. So she figured that out quick, but her next response was, well, it has to be way too expensive. Because everybody knows that green costs more, right? Wrong. Even Elizabeth Gore, who is really smart about this stuff, actually said that in the last session, that sustainability is going to cost more. Ray Anderson, many of you know, the legendary founder and CEO of Interface Carpet, a dear friend now gone from this world, used to say, if sustainability is costing you money, you're doing it wrong. So she said, it must be too expensive. And I said, actually, no, here's the economics. None of these buildings cost a dime more to build than comparable, not net zero buildings. And of course, they cost far less to operate. So the economics are, I think the technical term is pretty damn good. And she then said, well, but okay, but the developers will never let you do this. The political dimension of this work. And I said, well, yeah, if the developers think it's going to lose them money, they will not let us do this, and they should not. Because it's not our job as a city to make our citizens lose money. I said, but if they see that there's a way for them to make more money doing this, they're going to be our best friends. And her response was, well, we'll see. I'm not so sure about that. 6 months later, this person brought to City Council a proposal for, still in discussion, but a concept of net zero zoning. In other words, instead of saying to developers, here's the height limit that you cannot build beyond, or here's the floor area ratio you cannot exceed, the concept was, what if we let you build anything you want as long as it adds no new energy, water, greenhouse gas, or transportation demand? Wow. Wow. I fell off my chair. I never could have thought of that. I mean, it's a great example of the symbiosis across big differences, because neither of us could have come up with that by ourselves. But together, something new emerged and is now part of the discussion and exploration in the city.
I think there are many beautiful aspects to what you just described. So the symbiosis there, but also, we have these new solutions, but mindsets still need to change and accept them. And so it was a wonderful story of you exposing someone to new solutions and being patient and persistent, perhaps, with her, and then to have her internalize that herself.
Patient and persistent and frustrating each other is part of the challenge of the work. Sort of my watchword. I don't say this, and I'll do a Bernie Sanders thing. This is a secret. Don't tell anybody. But my guide or my goal in this work is to be the sand in the oyster, not the sand on the sandpaper.
Okay, very good.
And so I risk rubbing people raw and irritating people and getting people upset with me because I'm coming up with bringing in these crazy ideas. But the job is to land them by making them pragmatic, economical, implementable, with timelines and people responsible and folks eager to do them.
Very cool. Well, I know there's some exciting things going on related to transportation. It'd be great if you could tell us something about that.
Well, transportation becomes the core of the story, it turns out. I didn't expect this going in. But when we did our greenhouse gas inventory, well, let me back up for a moment. So as I mentioned, Palo Alto has a municipal utility. Golly, I forget what year it started. I guess around, in the first decade of the century, we introduced a program called Palo Alto Green, which invited customers to voluntarily pay extra on their energy bill to offset the carbon impact of their electricity. And ultimately, about 22% of our customers volunteered to spend more money to do that. In 2013, the City Council, encouraged by a citizen group called CarbonFree Palo Alto and a number of others, decided to take the entire electricity portfolio carbon neutral. Two steps to the strategy. One was to expand the renewable portfolio. It had been, I think, about a core 20 or 25% renewable at that point, about half hydro, and the balance fossil fuel. And so they set the utilities on a program to buy more renewables, and by 2017 to have the portfolio totally fossil fuel free, just hydro and renewables. And you may have seen a month ago, Palo Alto just did the least expensive purchase of large-scale solar that anyone's ever done, 3.67 cents per kilowatt hour. Mind-blowing. Really good buyers in that organization. So one part of the strategy was the renewable portfolio over 4 years. And in the meantime, the city said, let's buy RECs. Let's immediately offset all of our fossil fuel emissions now from our electricity and declare the electricity carbon neutral. So that was done. As a result of that and a number of other measures, Palo Alto's emissions are now down 36% from 1990. Yeah, and if any of you are not familiar with the numbers, you know the California goal is 80% by 2050. The interim California goal is 40% by 2030. We're at 36% now, which is way cool. And I take no credit for that. That was set in motion by people before I got there, but it opens up a very clear challenge and a very interesting possibility. So if you look at our remaining carbon footprint, almost two-thirds of it, I think it's about 65%, comes from road transportation, from people commuting into Palo Alto, commuting out of Palo Alto, driving around in Palo Alto. This is a city of 66,000 people. That's 148,000 people in the daytime. About 90,000 people are commuting in every day, more than half of them driving in cars, most of those solo. So that's about two-thirds of our footprint. About a quarter of our footprint is natural gas, which the utility also provides. Now, so two things open up from that. I'm going to come to transportation second. Let me just do the other one first. There's a notion called fuel switching. You may have heard utilities talk about it. If you're in Boston or New York or Chicago, fuel switching means taking the utility out of coal and into natural gas as a less polluting, less greenhouse gas emitting fuel. In Palo Alto, where the electricity is clean, what fuel switching means is leaving natural gas and going toward electricity. So we're in the process of a 10-phase analysis looking at, can we electrify the city? Can we switch people's water heating from natural gas water heaters to heat pump electric water heaters with efficiency factors of over 300%? Can we, easy to think about in terms of retrofits, easy to think about in terms of new construction. We're actually talking to developers about building all electric buildings going forward. The big challenge, of course, is what do you do with the existing building stock and how do you encourage change in buildings that weren't planning to change? But we're in the process of looking at that, analyzing feasibility, technologies, cost effectiveness, and so forth. So that's one piece of that puzzle on the path to 80 by 30. The transportation is a tough one because it's not something that a city of 66,000 people in a multi-million person metro area can solve by itself. But the world is shifting very rapidly on this. So a year and a half ago, I went to Helsinki in Finland, one of 4 cities that I'm aware of that has set a goal of becoming a car-free city. And you think about it, in Scandinavia, where it's cold, they have weather. So I went over there for a day to see what was going on and learned from them about an initiative they're developing at a national level called Mobility as a Service. The concept in a nutshell is what if you could make it more convenient for anybody, anywhere, at any time to not have to get into a car and drive. And it's a radically different approach to transportation management than we've done, because what we've typically done is there's too much congestion on the road, so let's build more roads. The freeway is too crowded, let's widen the freeway. There's not enough parking space, let's add more parking garages. And if you have a smattering of systems thinking in your body, you understand what that does. The solution makes the problem worse. And it just goes on and on and on, making the problem worse, but not really addressing what's the core need. And what is it that people need? People don't need cars and freeways. People need to be able to get to where they need to get to do what they need to do, whatever that is, and what it is for you, and what it is for you, and what it is for you are different. So I started asking people this question: what would it take? What if we could make it more convenient for anybody, anywhere, at any time, to not have to get into a car and drive? And the typical responses that I've gotten are almost always two parts. Number one, that's a great idea. Number two, but it would never work for me. And my next question, of course, is, well, tell me why. And why might be that you have two jobs and it's difficult to get there with public transportation, or you have kids you have to pick up at daycare, or you carry a lot of gear in your car, or whatever it is. Everybody's got the different factors of their life. And I hear that not as a problem, but as a design specification. Okay, those are now things we need to take into account. Everything from everybody needs to be taken into account, and how do you do that? And how you do that is with one of these. This is my car. Okay? The idea from the Finns is, what if you could put together a single app that tied in every mode of transportation you might ever use? Car share, bike share, transit, BART, Hertz, you name it, in a subscription service like here. So here I pay a monthly bill to AT&T, and I get broadband and text and voice and data. And my bundle is different than your bundle, and it's different than your bundle because you like to watch a lot of movies, so you have a big data budget, and I don't, but I'm text happy, so I got a big text budget. We're all different, but it's all a single payment once a month. All the transactions are seamless. You don't have to have 8 different apps, a different one for Lyft, and a different one for Uber, and a different one for Samtrans. It's all in one, plan, book, pay, ride, seamless. Everything interconnected, all schedules interconnected, effortless. Possible, of course, you know that. You've seen pieces of that puzzle. They've invested tons of money out of a $5 billion national research agency, seeing this as a national strategy for Finland. Nokia's gone. We're thinking about what comes next. So we have convened out of Palo Alto, tiny city, like I said, that can't solve the problem, but we've convened the regional discussion in the Bay Area around mobility as a service, and started with a first meeting just over a year ago with 25 people from Stanford and San Jose and Google and some of the other companies and cities in the region. Next meeting 3 months later was 50. Next meeting 3 months later was 75 people. At that third meeting, the MTC, the Regional Transportation Organization, was there kind of listening and wondering, is this thing real or not? And then a month ago they called us up, said, how could we help? So there's, even a small city can have a role as kind of a spark plug to start to generate a conversation, help guide it, help nurture it. We're in the meantime about to issue an RFP to start to spec this kind of system for the Bay Area. We'll just proceed on our own if people don't want to play together. But you can see very clearly this works much better if people play together. Because anybody who's commuting in the Bay Area is probably going through multiple counties and multiple transit jurisdictions. And here's our biggest challenge. Most transportation planners use VMT, vehicle miles traveled, as the key metric. More people traveling more miles means more cars on the road, et cetera, other things being equal. I think the key metric is number of transit agencies per million people. Bay Area is worst in the world on that. And so we have to find a way to forge collaboration across agencies that came into being for different reasons at different times, have their institutional imperatives, their ways of doing things, but now need to find a new way to break through this.
Sure, yeah. So I think we have one almost for every county, is that right?
We have one for every county, we have many for cities, we have a bunch of interjurisdictional stuff. I'm not sure the count, it's somewhere between 29 and 49.
Yeah.
We have 9 counties, 105 cities, and 20, 30 or 50 transit agencies.
Right.
So that's one part of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle is electrification, and shifting the fleet, just as we would do at home, shifting the vehicle fleet in the region from fossil fuel powered to electrical powered. State of California has a goal of 30% EVs by 2030. We're proposing a goal of 90% for Palo Alto by 2030 and 50% of the incoming vehicles, which is where most of our commute load is the incoming. My colleagues a month ago said, they say this a lot, see, you're crazy in various versions. They say, well, it just doesn't pass the laugh test. You couldn't possibly do that. If the state's going for 30%, how could we be triple the state? How could you possibly do that? That was the extent of the argument, which in my mind is not a grounded argument. There's all kinds of ways we could be wrong, but that's not the reason. And if you Palo Alto's already got 4 to 5 times the EV population of the state. Not that we'll be able to maintain that necessarily, but a couple of other data points landed on our desks in the last week or two. You may have seen the stories. Netherlands announced that as of 2025, only electric vehicles will be sold in Holland. Norway had announced a month or two before that by 2025, only electric vehicles will be sold in Norway.
Wow.
India is moving around the same kind of goal, maybe 2030, maybe 2025, but they're looking at taking the entire Indian subcontinent to all electric vehicles by 2030. And as if that wasn't enough, late last week, in 2 days, Tesla took pre-orders for 250,000 Model 3s, because the environment's going to be changing very rapidly. The demands are going to change very rapidly. Right now, with 80-mile range EVs, charging infrastructure is really important. You can't get there and back to a lot of places, even in the Bay Area, unless you know you're going to get a charge when you get there. With 200 or 300-mile range EVs, that's less important. So do cities invest a lot in charging infrastructure now that may not be necessary in 5 years? What's the responsible use of public resource? And that's, it's a really interesting, challenging problem.
Well, the community, like Palo Alto, a community of early adopters, I find it really exciting. It helps drive innovation. And you're creating so many best practices for other communities. So
we're creating some, we're stealing others.
Okay, well, well, it just sounds like a really impactful position to be in. As you said, cities are sharing ideas and stuff. So are there any other new technologies out there, or where you see this sudden uptick in new technologies that are creating unexpected challenges?
Some of it is sudden. A lot of it is gradual. I think another area of great emphasis has been on our digital services. The city has a long-standing commitment to open data, to basically opening up as much of our data as feasible or acceptable given privacy regulations. So our budgets are online, our salaries are online, lots of operating data is online. We have 60 different digital services available to citizens now. And partly that's just a matter of good government and commitment to transparency, but partly it's a recognition that with that data available in the field, people are going to come up with ideas. People are going to think of things or put that data set together with that data set and come up with a new product. And there have already been companies that have been born out of that contribution of open data to the community.
Excellent.
So that's a place where you can't exactly predict what the results will be, but we know that it's the right thing to do, and we're doing that. In terms of not so much technology, but really policy technology, we've been streamlining the regulatory process. 2 years ago, it took 9 months to get a solar permit in Palo Alto. So I mean, crazy. Here's a city with a commitment to renewable energy, and you couldn't get a permit. Vendors came into town to set up shop and then left, said we just can't do business here. So Peter Pernijot, our development services director, basically re-engineered the permit process, took it from 9 months to 1 month to a week to a day to over the counter. So you still have to, you have to protect public safety. You have to have, reliability against fire and other concerns, but you don't have to take 9 months to do that.
Yeah.
And we now have the ability, just introduced last week, a smartphone app that lets people track their permit online. So you know where you are, when you are, what's expected, how fast it's moving. Just simple technology-enhanced good government. So that would be another example.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So are other cities in the region adopting that? I'm just thinking from the standpoint of a solar provider, a business person, you're having to deal with this patchwork of regulatory requirements. Is this catching on with other cities?
I hope so. I don't know for sure. I have to ask Peter on that. I mean, the challenge there is that building codes are, there's a state building code, but the permitting is a local function, so you always will have some variation.
Right.
Hopefully we learn best practices and ratchet up together, and I think of this as kind of a collaborative competition.
Yeah,
We're doing better than you, but here's what we did. What do you got
yeah.
to show us?
So again, with your CSO cap
Yeah.
on and talking to other CSOs, what's your top recommendation to folks when they ask you, hey, Gail, you guys are on the front end of this development, what do you recommend? Anywhere in the country?
I guess fundamentally I recommend the same thing I would recommend to a corporate client from Natural Logic, which is to focus first on what it is you really care about. What is it that you and your community really care about? How do you, what would get you to that, and then design the programs from that. It's a very different approach than starting with programs that we have and making them a little bit better. You're going to do both of those. You have to do both of those. But the step-by-step incremental movement out of current reality, it's a very hard way to innovate. It's a very hard way to make big leaps. Big leaps come from, in my experience, much more from setting big, hairy, audacious goals, imagining their success and reverse engineering the mission, like NASA did with the Apollo program. And in terms of, we talked earlier about the challenge of democracy. One of the things that most effectively breaks the log jams and the feuds and often battles between people is helping people step back from their position and their ideology and their pronouncements back to what it is they really care about, what really animates them in their lives, what matters to them and their families. And when you do that, as my colleague Bill Reed has found again and again around the country, fierce disagreements can turn into very rich collaborations. We can separate the differences around the means to the agreement around what we're trying to do together as a community, and then think together creatively of how might we do that in ways that fit with each of our different circumstances and beliefs.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And thanks for bringing up Natural Logic. Definitely want to ask you,
Sure.
now with your other cap on, as founder of Natural Logic, what's the current state of corporate sustainability right now in the U.S.? Are people catching on? Is this becoming core?
Sure. So just a quick background for those who don't know. Natural Logic Incorporated is my consulting company. I'm on secondment from that to the city, but the company is still operating and basically providing deep sustainability strategy advisory services, mostly to major international corporations. The premise there is that sustainability done right is an unprecedentedly powerful driver of not only cost savings, which is one of the ways that many people think of it, but of innovation, of profitability, of brand value, of customer loyalty, employee loyalty, risk mitigation, flexible platforms for the future, and all kinds of other good stuff. Is sustainability catching on? Yeah, dramatically and powerfully. You see many examples of it. You see it in all the companies that are calling for national carbon pricing. Many of whom have introduced their own internal carbon pricing, like Microsoft. 300 or 400 companies have done that. But many companies are asking for a common policy platform, recognizing that there's a serious, profound business risk here. If you're not a Republican in Congress, you know that there's serious risk here. People have the responsibility to grapple with that, and so they're trying to do that. For some, it's a defensive posture. For some, Dell, who we heard from this morning as an example, it's an offensive, creative posture of bringing new value. We see a great growth in companies that are embracing the notion of purpose-driven organizations, and I want to come back to that in a moment. We see a sudden and rapid uptake of companies that are looking at new ways of doing their accounting that reflects physical reality, that reflects the ecological value that underlies the books. Puma was the first, actually started running 2 sets of books a few years ago. One, the standard, generally accepted principles and practices financial books, and another, an ecological P&L that asked the question, what if we assigned economic value to energy, water, and biodiversity? And they found that if they did that, their profit disappeared. A company called True Cost in England did a similar analysis for 50 other companies and found that for most, if not many, global corporations, their profit would be gone if they had to pay the real costs that they are currently ducking, legally, but ducking, of what economists so charmingly call externalities, things that are real but aren't real, things that matter but not here. And so I think we're seeing a growing movement toward what I've been calling for years the challenge of getting the prices right. Free market, great idea, but if the prices lie, you can't possibly make good decisions. So for me, this has been a surprise to see the dozens of companies that are starting to embrace that challenge in a very forthright way. We see it in the phenomenal growth of renewable energy. Not only the growing penetration of photovoltaics, but the incredibly rapid price decline. And if you look at photovoltaics, the price performance curve looks like that, right? If you look at electric vehicles, it looks like that. If you look at battery technology, it looks like that. If you look at autonomous vehicles, it looks like that. If you look at sensor technology, it looks like that. Tony Seba at Stanford University, author of a book called Clean Disruption, says if you put those 5 trends together, the entire energy and transportation game, he predicts, flips inside of 10 to 15 years. Tony says there'll be no internal combustion cars sold in the United States by 2030, not because of any policy decision, but because of how the market is moving. He actually thinks more like by 2025.
Across all vehicle types?
Heavy vehicles will be a little bit slower. But even BMW, which makes heavy vehicles as well as light, has committed the entire company to go electric.
Wow.
Ultimate driving machine. So these are people who will not sacrifice performance in their engineering. They're going to take the whole thing electric.
What do you think about hydrogen? Because I know some Japanese automakers are investing a lot in hydrogen.
They
Germans
are.
investing in the hydrogen.
You got it
infrastructure.
exactly right. I'm betting with the electrics for this for a number of reasons. One is the power density. Very important is the simplicity and reliability and management across the vehicles. Electric vehicles have many fewer moving parts than combustion vehicles. Third is that the power distribution infrastructure already exists. For the Japanese strategy, we have to build out hydrogen highway. We already have electric highway, or very close to it. So for a bunch of reasons, it's an open question and people are still debating it. The state is putting money into both directions. The state is putting money into fuel cell strategies as one of the elements in the mix. My personal bet is that it's going to play out in the direction of electrics.
That's very exciting.
So if you're going to buy a car, I would advise you to buy an electric, but I would advise you to think about whether you need to buy a car. Because the first choice is don't. Because again, here's my car, folks. How many of you own a car? Okay, so the data is probably a little bit different if you're in Sonoma than if you're in the big city, but nationally, the average utilization of a privately owned automobile, does anybody care to guess? 6% of the time that car is in use. 94% of the time it's sitting around doing nothing. It's probably your second largest investment after your home. So what kind of economic sense does it make to have your second largest capital asset be doing nothing 94% of the time? And the 6% of the time that it's doing something, it's probably only at 20% capacity because you're probably driving alone. That's stupid capital utilization. It's bad business. And it's going to change.
Very exciting. So back to the corporate
Yep.
space. So we were chatting before, you were talking about CSR and,
Yep.
and sustainability kind of.
Well,
being on the side.
I'm not interested in CSR.
No, well, but it was, okay. So the role of sustainability
Yeah.
in the corporation,
Yeah.
is that becoming more core in terms of operationally? Is everyone becoming involved?
It's becoming more core in some, I think, like with anything, you see very uneven development across companies. In some cases, the CSO is a direct channel to the executive suite and is seen as a business function. In many companies, it's still seen as a more peripheral. That's why I made my crack about CSR. Corporate social responsibility is usually not a business,
Exactly.
core business function. It often lives in marketing or in government affairs or philanthropy. It's like a nice thing to do, which it is. But there's something much more powerful afoot here. And so you see in companies like Interface and Campbell's and Seventh Generation and Nike and others where this is much more of part of the core business strategy of the company. Purpose-driven, foresight-driven, risk-conscious, and much more powerful.
Yeah, very exciting. So we definitely wanted to open it up to questions if anyone has any for Gil. We have one in the back.
Yeah.
Can you speak loudly?
Sure. So the question is about equity in cities as it relates to the work that you're doing. So Palo Alto is an amazing example of a city that has the resources to sort of engage in the work that you're doing, and there's a reason it's been a leader. I'm curious on what your perspective is in terms of cities that don't have the type of resources that a city like Palo Alto does. will this trickle out, do you think, or are there significant challenges between those cities?
Sean, to repeat the question, I'll summarize it. So Palo Alto has a lot of resources as a city to deploy creative solutions. Other cities do not. Gil, what do you think for those cities with far fewer resources? Palo Alto.
Well, all of us start in different situations in the situation that we are, so any city has to take stock of what its resources are. Back in our early work at Institute for Local Self-Reliance, decades ago, one of the things that we did was resource inventories of cities, and we found, lo and behold, and other researchers confirmed this, that in many cases, what we think of as poor cities or poor parts of cities are not poor because they lack resources, but they're poor because their resources are draining out. The balance of payments, if you will, of communities can be negative, just like the balance of payments in countries. And in many cases, you find that the net flow of wealth out of a poor community exceeds the flow in of government resources, welfare, and so forth. And so one of the things that we looked at there was developing community-based enterprises, community-owned food organizations, and so forth, so the money could stay local and cycle and drive the economic multiplier. So I think one thing you do is you take stock of what you got. What every city's got, regardless of the financial resources, it's got sun and rain and wind falling on it. And there's just new research out from the federal government indicating that rooftop solar could potentially deliver 40% of U.S. electrical demand. So everybody's got that. Everybody's got the ability to capture water. Everybody's got housing stock in whatever state of repair or disrepair it's in. Look at what's going on in Detroit now to bring that city back from real devastation. But there's an explosion of entrepreneurship and innovation happening in Detroit. The fundamental asset, of course, is people and how you bring people together and support them and in learning, but also support them in working together and actually capturing ideas and turning them into something rather than having them dribble away. It's going to be different everywhere. And I think, don't take my word for it. I think what you do is look at cities around the world, including some very poor cities who are doing remarkably creative work.
I love that systems view you're describing. So at 3 here. Oh.
Wondering if you could offer a little perspective on the evolution of our collective work, come from thinking about the environment to thinking about sustainability, to thinking about climate, and now these days it's all about resilience. And interested in kind of thinking about, I personally have been thinking about resilience both at the ecological level, societal, community level, and also our individual personal resilience. And thinking about that within the realm of your work with a local government and how you bring those different threads in.
Well, resilience, thank you for the question. So the question is about the evolution of thinking in this field from environmental sustainable to climate to resilience, and I would add to that thrivability, which is another term we're hearing more and more being talked about now. Resilience, as C.S. Holling, the ecologist, defined it some decades ago, is the ability of a system to respond to perturbation and maintain its identity and its well-being and its ability to adapt. And so it's critically important. In general, it's enormously important for us now because we are facing a century of massive perturbation. It's going to get weird. We're going to lose half of Florida. We're going to lose potentially many coastal cities. We're going to see health effects from rising temperatures. We're going to see rising crime rates from rising temperatures. So it's a major issue across the board. The Rockefeller Foundation a couple years ago created a program called 100 Resilient Cities. They're funding 100 cities around the world to develop resilience programs. Berkeley, one of the first 3 in the Bay Area, Berkeley, San Francisco, and Oakland were in the first 10 cohort. So they just released their resilience plan this last week. So it seems to be a very powerful organizing concept that brings together environment, public safety, community engagement, neighborhood collaboration, and risk management, which is where the financial people start to get interested. So I think there's a lot of power there.
We're short on time, but maybe one last question.
Well, I was curious about what's the conversation in Palo Alto around housing and density and affordability and even affordability, sort of different market rate.
Great last question.
So the question was about housing and affordability in Palo Alto, and it's a perfect question for very little time left to answer it. Let me say two things about this. First of all, this is probably the most politically contentious issue in Palo Alto today. The city council majority turned in the last election around this issue, and a well-organized group of residents called the residentialists spoke out against growth, and that's been the mood of the council lately. It's a big challenge. It's a really big challenge. Palo Alto has 2.5 times the national average income. It's a very prosperous community, second most educated community in the country. It's a really unusual place. 2.5 times the average national income, 10 times the national average housing price. So even for people who have a lot of money, it's a problem. It's a problem all up and down the peninsula. The commute issue that I talked about before isn't just about carbon, it's about miserable congestion and commuting. Cities and even major companies find it difficult to recruit and retain people because people just don't want to suffer that much in the commuting. One of the potential strategies to deal with that is to build additional housing. And some people say, let's not build any housing, let's cap job growth, let's not grow any more business, which is an odd thing for a city to say because most cities want to see their economies grow. But if you just grow jobs without growing housing, you make the problem worse. But if you grow housing, people are concerned that you make the problem worse. That's why this zero net impact zoning idea is so powerful, because what if we could add housing that didn't add any of the impact that people hate? And if we made it transit-oriented and mixed use so you could walk to shops and schools and laundromats and movie theaters. So that's a possibility. I'll be frank, it's a very sensitive possibility. People say, don't even talk about this, people will freak out. And I say, no, my job is to talk about it and support a grounded conversation. It's not my decision, it's the voters' decision. It's the council's decision and the voters' decision. My job is to recommend, here's some alternatives you may not have thought of, here's a way to think about them that may be more viable, and we'll see where it shakes out. It's in the mix in our proposed climate plan. It's one of 10 different strategy areas. It doesn't all hinge on that. 5 or 10% of our greenhouse gas savings will come from that if the council adopts what we've proposed. But what we've said to them is, look, here's your palette. You can do more of this and less of that, or more of this and less of that. That's where the political discussion comes in.
And where the private sector can come in. And what we're going to try to do is build a couple of them right there in Palo Alto and on the Stanford campus with Porin's help, Bioregional's help, and actually show people right there in the private sector without
Case in point, the Stanford Research Park, many of you are familiar with that. It's the headquarters of Hewlett-Packard and SAP and Tesla and a whole bunch of other companies. Corporate campuses, buildings on large areas of open space, 22,000 people work there every day. Most of them are commuting in. And so we started talking kind of off the record a couple of years ago about what if they built housing there? What if they built a miniature city there that was complete so that people could live there, work there, do the amenities of their lives there, obviously wouldn't be locked in, but they wouldn't have to travel very far to do that. People once again said, you're crazy, that's insane, no one will tolerate it, don't even talk about it. But at the last meeting of our Citizens Advisory Commission for the city's new comprehensive plan, representative of Stanford University said, we are looking at adding a couple of thousand units at that site in a mixed-use, complete mini city. Now, the question will be, how many? The question will be, is it a one-planet community? How is it done? But this is part of the work, is that, let me end on this, because it's a real challenge for a CSO, whether in a city or not. So we're doing, we've done a climate plan with lots of detailed analytics and numbers and prices and so forth, but a lot of the work is talking to people and saying, hey, what about this? Or have you thought about that? And, more convenient not to drive, new housing with no impact. And eventually, these ideas become part of the conversation. Mobility is now part of the conversation in the Bay Area where it wasn't 2 years ago. And the challenge for the CSO is that I go before council and they say, well, Gil, you haven't done anything.
Oh, wow.
Because, I can't take credit for the conversation shifting. The conversation shifts. And it shifts in part because of what I and other people have said, but it's not like, give me $1 million and I'll build a building. It's a different kind of visibility result. And if you want to do this work, you have to be comfortable with that, because that's how it works. If you don't take my word for it, go back and read the Tao Te Ching. We've known this for a long, long time.
Let's give Gil a big hand.